Okay, colleagues, I'm going to call the meeting of the Corporate Services Committee to order. Before we get into the agenda, I just wanted to let everyone know that I received regrets from both Councillor Ridley and Councillor Park. And also we have Councillor Helmer joining us on the committee for the first time. So welcome to Councillor Helmer, who was appointed by Municipal Council to fill in for Councillor Zafman. So we have a quorum of our committee. We have a fairly light agenda. We have a timely in-camera matter, hence the need for the meeting, and we have one public matter. So we will go through those in order as we normally do. So I'll ask for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. We have no consent items. We have no scheduled items. We have one item for direction. Yes, Councillor Asher?
I know that this is unusual, Mr. Chair, but I wonder if I could ask you to just welcome those students up there. Or have you done that?
I certainly can. I might have to declare a conflict, but
I could do it.
yes, no. Welcome to the students participating in DPA and MPA program here at City Hall. They've come to observe the wonderful work of this committee, I'm sure. The agendas aren't always this light, but we do have some, I think, interesting debate for you today. So thanks for coming, and certainly after the meeting, I know a number of us are always around up in the counselor's office if people have any questions when your class is done. So thanks for joining us. Good enough? Perfect. All right. Council member submission, recording of in-camera closed sessions. This is item 2 for direction. We have a letter from Councillor Salih and Councillor Squire. They're both here today. I just asked them which one would like to introduce their letter, and Councillor Salih, I think, won the rock, paper, scissors. So I'll go to you, Councillor Salih.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and myself and Councillor Squire, we wanted to submit this letter and hopefully have someone move it here at committee. I'll just read the letter. To enhance our accountability with respect to closed session meetings held in accordance with this Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001, as amended to the undersigned request that the Civic Administration take the necessary steps to implement audio recording of closed session meetings. It is our understanding that some municipalities carry out this practice. It's also noted that the Ontario Ombudsman has recommended this practice for all municipalities. So we therefore respectfully request that the following recommendation be supported: that Civic Administration be directed to take the necessary steps to implement audio recording of closed session meetings. I'll leave my comments till later. I just look for hopefully someone to move or in a seconder on this.
So I'll open it up to discussion from committee colleagues. Councillor Asher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been in this council now for 16 years and we've never done this. I know that we've talked about it in the past, and I have had several different opinions on this. I did not check with the other council in other parts as to how they handle this. But some of I would like to hear if there's a legal opinion on this, because I've heard legal opinion on this in the past. And it's from some of those opinions that we are where we are today, not taking the notes. So from a personal perspective, I don't have a problem with it, but I want to know if there are problems with it from a legal perspective, particularly when we have, when our solicitor is giving us personal information. I'd like to know what their opinion of that is. So I don't know if we have to go into camera for this, but I noticed that our legal people are here, and Mr. Zudema is here. So I'd really like to hear staff's opinion on this.
Thanks, Councillor. So I'm happy to go to Mr. Montier or Mr. Zudema. Likely Mr. Montier first, since you're asking a legal question. He'll respond to whatever he can in public. If we need to go into camera, I'm sure he'll let us know if there's something that he can't tell us in this forum, but I'd like to start here.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, obviously the issue of recording closed sessions is something that's been recommended to us by the Ombudsman. There's no legal issue per se relating to the recording of those meetings. However, we will need to create procedures around how that information is retained, how that information is disclosed, And the obvious idea would be, how do we deal with things that are protected by solicitor-client privilege or other privileges that we may want to invoke in the event that there's a request for the contents of those meetings. So we'd be happy to come back to you with a report that outlines how staff, civic administration, would see that unfolding or playing out, if that's what the committee would like.
Councillor Asher?
Can I hear from
Mr. Zidema?
I'll just add to that briefly, and we're certainly, you know, we'll act under the direction of committee and council on this, but as I think Mr. Montier has indicated, it may be, you know, and I'm reading to take the necessary steps, and probably one necessary step would be to ensure that we develop the rules and the procedure and the protocol as to how this would work. And so as a for instance, and Mr. Montier alluded to it, and as through the chair, a member of the committee raised the question, on occasion when we are in camera and we're dealing with solicitor-client advice, I guess the question one might have is, if the audio tape is there and there's a request for it, how does the city deal with it? Does the city automatically send the tape over, or does the council deal with the request in terms of waiving a potential solicitor-client privilege item? And how long do we keep these things? Do we have a redundancy? We probably need to in case, you know, there's a defect with the tape. So I think that we could probably benefit from other municipalities that are already doing this in terms of seeing what they have. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but there probably also is a benefit to having a Made in London stamp on this, if this is the direction that council wants to go. And so I don't want to be seen as obstructing where council may want to go, but I do think that as you move forward, certainly figuring out ahead of time how this is going to be dealt with, and I would imagine that the clerks would probably have direct carriage of this and probably bring back a report from clerks in conjunction with legal. And you know, in terms of what's a reasonable time frame, I think I'd defer to the deputy clerk and Mr. Montier in that regard.
So you've heard the answer. You're looking for the reasonable time frame too?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Maybe I'll hear from the clerk, and what would be a reasonable time frame?
Noting the upcoming meeting cycles, I would expect we could report back within the next 2 cycles. We will need time to put on paper some of the information that we've gathered, and also we'll want to do some investigation in conjunction with information technology as well in terms of the equipment that we might use for this purpose.
Go ahead, Councillor Usher.
thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Mr. Zudman, Mr. Monteith, and Mrs. Rowe. I think that this is reasonable, and I hope that our movers would be satisfied with that. Instead of just saying to implement it, I would like a report coming back as to what are the conditions and everything else, what we have to meet and so on. And I think that the idea about talking to some of the other municipalities as to what they're doing to incorporate that in with us, that would be very helpful too, because I like to understand it before I say, yeah, let's move ahead.
Thanks, Councillor. I have Councillor Helmer, then Councillor Squire.
Thank you. And to my colleagues, I think this is pretty reasonable. I think I support the suggested motion that our colleagues have brought forward. I think it's reasonable to give civic administration some direction, and they're going to bring forward all the necessary things. We'll have to update the records retention bylaw probably. We'll have to make some changes to some policies and procedures along the way. I think this gives them the direction they need to start that process, and I'm sure to evolve one or more reports back to this committee. I do think that it's going to be, technologically, it might be a little bit tricky because in closed sessions, for example, we don't use microphones, and then to get a good recording of what everyone's saying in a big room without microphones is a bit tricky, but I'm sure we can figure that out. My only question really is around the cost. You know, sometimes when we pass bylaws and give directions, we don't have a sense of how much these will cost. My expectation is it's not going to be very expensive, so I'm willing to support it, but if we have any indication that it is going to be fairly expensive, then I'd like to know that at this point. I don't think it will be, but I'd like to know if we have an idea at this point.
Thanks, Councillor Helmer. I have the deputy clerk who can answer some questions on preliminary costs.
Again, I would want to have a conversation with information technology to make sure that what we've looked at would be suitable for the purpose. But in an initial scan of audio recording equipment, a good piece of equipment for that purpose is around $500. It's not a cost-intensive endeavor.
Anything further, Councillor Helmer? Okay. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much for recognizing, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a couple of things clear so we understand. First of all, we're not talking about, and I don't want any confusion, we're not talking about making things that are in camera out of camera. If they are properly in camera, all that this is suggesting is that there be an accurate record of what is happening in camera for the purposes of anything that may come up after that. Many of you will remember that the City of London was involved in a very expensive piece of litigation that went to a fairly high level because of an in-camera proceeding that later was found by the courts not to properly be in camera. The difficulty we face as councillors is that if there's not an accurate record of the in-camera proceedings, we could be subject to subpoena, we could be called to give evidence of what happened on the in-camera proceedings. Because people's memories are not perfect, you'll have councillors possibly giving evidence and having contradictory evidence given at a judicial hearing, not because they're being dishonest, but because of the passage of time. So this is really, I have no problem with working out the technical matters, but the principle that we should be keeping an accurate record of our in-camera proceedings, I would think is a simple and straightforward one. That really is, I'm quite shocked actually that we haven't done it up till now, to have that accurate record. Now, in my view, with all due respect, there may be some additional benefits to that, which might be that meandering conversations happening in camera may be a little less likely to occur where people know they're being taped. And quite frankly, as a counselor, and I'll be blunt, I've become increasingly disturbed by the amount of time we spend in camera not giving anything away, but discussions that I don't think are focused on the matters that we're in camera for. We all have to remember that the Municipal Act doesn't say we shall be in camera on these matters. It says we may be in camera on these matters. So we have an absolute responsibility to have all meetings as open meetings, except in very limited circumstances. So I think this is a preliminary move forward. I can tell you that in the future, I would hope this council would take a harder look at the whole in camera and that we start taking some ownership of the issue of in camera. What I'm saying is we don't just sit here, have someone read a bunch of words, we assume we have to go in camera, we walk into the in camera session like sheep and sit there for 2 or 3 hours. There's a lot of things that we have to make decisions on. And there may be instances where we as a council want to stay in public. And it may be in the public interest that we do that. I know I'm a little off topic, but this is an area that I think is important. This is a first step. I think we can even do better. So that's where I am right now. But certainly administration's points about let's work out the technical details are entirely valid. And I take no issue with that.
Councillor Asher, I have you on the list next.
So I appreciate those comments and I appreciate everyone's comments really. So I'd like to just move that we, we refer this to staff to come back to us with a report as to how we can implement this based on all the conversations we had here.
We'll put up some wording on the screen, see if you're okay with that. The clerks have drafted something. I'd like to actually weigh on this at the appropriate time. I'm going to wait to see if there's a seconder. I also know there are other colleagues visiting here too. So if you're okay with that, you can move that, Councillor Usher, at which point we're at committee. So I'd probably switch chairs with you and weigh in on the discussion we've had so far. Thank you. So with a three-member committee, I thought it was important for me probably to weigh in on this today. I really appreciate the comments that my colleagues have made. One thing I'm particularly interested in is more along the lines of the original direction that was drafted in the letter, that we're going to do this, and that we'll make the necessary steps to implement, of which a number of reasonable steps, I think expected steps, have already been outlined by Civic Administration as well as some colleagues here today. I see no reason why there would be any obstacles that would stop us from moving towards recording in-camera meetings. Quite frankly, and I'll say it again, even though Councillor Squire said it, I don't want to be in a position of having to remember something 2.5 months ago. I would rather have a complete transcript and a complete record to be forwarded to the Ombudsman in the course of investigation, rather than relying on my memory and my notes. And I think that that is one of the key advantages of having an in-camera recording system, is that we have a complete and accurate transcript. It precludes the need to even interview counselors, because the Ombudsman can actually listen to the entire transcript, setting aside the issues that we might have to work out about solicitor-client privilege and what actually goes to the Ombudsman in what way. But those are all things that are contained within the original motion, I think, about steps to implement. So I would much prefer something that was more direct, to say this is a direction that the committee is recommending that council go in, and that, you know, we obviously won't proceed with that until the necessary steps have been taken for us to know how this is going to be operationalized. So I'm not sure that the language in the draft motion is, I mean, as long as that's what we're going to do, I could support this, but that's my preference, is that we're going towards implementing this. We're just going to work out the details.
Councillor Sally?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Councillor Morgan really spoke to exactly what I was hoping to say, which was, I think we want to make it very clear that we want to implement this, and just the latter is just a matter of getting the technical and the practical pieces down the road, and just letting staff report back those pieces, I think, is kind of the goal. I think the reality is from my understanding, it was 3 years ago, the Ombudsman recommended this, and recordings of in cameras, and other municipalities have actually implemented it. And it was because of London, from my understanding, that the whole conversation around recording in cameras. So here we are, the reason why there was a recommendation that was put forward, and yet we're the council who really are kind of the crux of it all, and having ourselves taken that step. And I think, even since our term of office, we've had a number of people issue some complaints and some, to the Ombudsman's office, and, nothing has been founded. But the reality is, it's a matter of that public trust and helping to enhance the accountability and transparency that I think could come with this. And I think also thinking forward in the future, I myself might not always be on this council, and it's also, I can see how in-camera can be abused. I'm not saying that this is particular with this council, but I'm saying I always have to be conscious of the fact that the decisions I'm making here today are for those down the road. And I think that by having this in place also puts those barriers and puts those safeguards in place to ensure that there is that level of accountability and transparency, and that we go in for the right reasons. So just to reiterate, really just the points that Councillor Morgan was stating earlier, as long as the motion captures that. But I think the original motion that I had was had room and latitude enough where staff could report back and say, this is how we're going to do it, but I'll leave that to committee.
Councillor Asher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I believe that this motion does say that. It just added the fact that to include a report back, Council. Regardless of how we do this, we're going to still have to have a report back to Council. And it seems to me that the way we've worded this, we say that Civic Administration be directed to take the necessary steps to do that, to implement audio recording of closed meetings in session. So it just seemed to me that we have captured that. The only thing that we are being specific here is that we want to report back. That's the only thing. But it's not saying that it's to bring the report for us to decide. This is deciding that we're going to go that way. The report is just going to tell us how we're going to do it. That's the way I'm reading this. Thank you.
I can read it that way too. I think the most important thing, if colleagues would let me just make a comment from the chair, is to make sure we have clarification on the operationalization of our motion. So I would look to civic administration if they can just clearly indicate that the operationalization of our motion as we have before us is, as Councillor Usher has basically said, that we're moving forward with this, bringing back a report on the policies and procedures that would be necessary to implement it.
I would usually defer to the clerk, deputy clerk. I think the resolution is, or the recommendation is clear. If you were to parse it in a different order so that it said that the administration be directed to take the necessary steps to implement the auto recording of closed meeting sessions, which would include a report back, it then puts the two actions together and it maybe clears it up. I don't know. Maybe that makes it worse.
I have Councillor Helmer on this.
Thank you, colleagues. I think it's been 21 minutes, and so far we've added 21 words to the suggestion that came from our colleagues in the letter. I think it's very clear that everybody and around the horseshoe seems to be in agreement this is the direction to go in. I think at this point, the debate is exhausted. This is the direction we need to move things forward. We should probably move on to voting.
And with that, I have no one else on the speakers list. So if there are no other speakers, we would move to voting. And I'm comfortable with this language as well. So that'll be on the system. We'll open that up for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
So that passes. So now we have our deferred matters list, which we would either make some changes to or just take a motion to receive. Is there any colleagues who have any comments on the deferred matters list? No? Then we'll put up a motion to receive that deferred matters list. No discussion, we'll open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
With that, we get to our in-camera portion of the meeting. We'll bring up a motion to move oh, sorry, I'll ask if there's any other additional business from committee members. No? Okay, so we'll move the in-camera portion of the meeting. I will assure our guests that we are going to camera for very legitimate reasons and there will be no meandering while we're in there. And the items C1 and C2 are our reasons for going into camera. They're listed on the public agenda. I'd look for a motion to do so from committee members.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
Just for the benefit of our colleagues and anyone else in the room, we're going to go into camera. We have no other business on the public agenda. We will likely open the doors, check if anybody's in the hall, and then adjourn from the in-camera room. So I would advise not waiting around in here. We're in committee room 3. We'll be in there for some period of time. And thanks very much for coming and observing. All you will see if you wait in the hallway is likely us coming out and adjourning. You can stick around for that if you like, or you can go back to your business. But thanks for coming and observing. So.